We have live. So good afternoon, everyone. If I could have confirmation that the live stream started. Fabulous. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to the Scrutiny Management Board meeting held today, Monday, 5th September 2022. So just for some admin items before we start, those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The council is also streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. And please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present, which I don't believe they are, that do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. Now, only committee members present in the meeting room may vote, and I do believe we have some virtual participants. So if they wish to contribute to the meeting, can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system, and Michael will alert me because I can't quite see the screen in the back. But just on that point, I know several members have raised the issue around attending in person versus attending virtually. So I'd just like to invite John Coleman, the Democratic Services Manager, to make a comment on that before we start, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Balderson. So the point of clarity that we just wanted to bring to the committee's attention is that as a council, we've decided we're going to operate hybrid meetings. Basically, what that means is we allow some members to attend virtually, and we need to have a quorate number of members within the committee itself to ensure that it's running legally. There is a bit of an ambiguity that's been left by COVID insofar as that the legislation which reverted back to its original form after the main COVID crisis had left us means that although we are still managing COVID as basically, you know, to ensure that we reduce contact with other people as much as possible, we've opted for the hybrid meeting, which means that those who are attending virtually are able to contribute to the meeting but don't have a legal right to vote and can't count these meetings as legally being in attendance. What we are looking to do is to record in the minutes virtual attendance, but the virtual attendance doesn't count to your physical attendance and your 6-month period of attending meetings. So we just thought we would clarify that for you. There is, as I say, a bit of ambiguity that's been left as a result of the reverting back to the existing legislation, but also maintaining this desire to try and keep contact with other people as minimal as possible while we're still in the current COVID conditions.
Thank you, John. And I think one thing that has been raised is that on the website at the moment, if you look at your attendance record, if you're attending virtually at the moment, you're neither reported as being present or an apology. So that I think that's something that they're trying to resolve. So it's very clear on the internet. Councillor Fagan.
Sorry, it's not working. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me? No. Sorry, no. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification about that. I think it probably would have been helpful for us to have had that clarification a lot earlier, because there are lots of us who have attended meetings virtually, thinking that we are complying with our councillor duties, and that actually, in effect, that's not being recorded. And there's also the issue of, you know, our carbon footprint in attending meetings. So I think that, you know, I'm not particularly happy about that. But also, I just wanted to point out that in the minutes on page 10, it does say that on the 6th paragraph, it says it does not allow for members to attend meetings and vote. And I think that we need to just amend that and say that attend virtually and vote, because otherwise it looks a bit peculiar.
And I think when we get to the minutes, we can make that. I think I had Councillor Summers next.
The past 2 years we've been doing things virtual. What's happened with all that time? Have records been kept actually? Because I've asked about this in the past. I know John Coleman, you've been away, but we really need an update on this, because many of us spent the past 2.5, 3 years coming to meetings virtually, and we don't know if it's been recorded. And I know at one time I was told that I was in, whatever you call it, and I wasn't when he checked it. So I think, you know, there's a few concerns here about what the legalities are. Okay.
And I think John Coleman, I think, has committed to looking into it together with legal services, and I think deliver an email to all councillors so that they're fully up to date, so that you can then raise that issue outside of this forum. Because I think as a Scrutiny Management Board, it's not our role in doing this, but I wanted to use this opportunity to explain it to you. So I think if you have any further issues, I think once John has clearly communicated it to all councillors, you should follow it up in that process, because I know we've got quite a bit of an agenda. So if you're all happy with that, if we can move on. Is there any urgent?
I'd just like John Coleman to confirm that will be happening.
John, if you're able to confirm your commitment towards that, please.
Yeah, so just by way of update, I've been in contact with our legal colleagues. I know Alice is in the room with you, but we are going to look to update the table showing attendance virtually as well as physically, just so that the record shows that members have been in attendance. We can also put a short explanatory note about what the law currently allows in terms of virtual attendance and physical attendance. So we'll keep we'll make sure that information is available.
Okay, so are we able to move on? Great. So I think apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
None received, Chair.
And name substitutes?
No, none received. There are apologies in addition to the membership committee from Councillor Liz Harvey, the Cabinet Member, Finance and Corporate Services.
Sorry, can you please use your microphone?
Cabinet Member, Councillor Liz Harvey, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services, has sent apologies.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in respect to Schedule 1, Schedule 2, or other interest from members in respect of items on the agenda? No. So then I'd like to move to the minutes, agenda item 4, and ask if there are any corrections to the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of June. I would just like based on the discussions we've had now, I think at the moment, women that attended virtually last time are listed as under apologies for absence. So I think my understanding is that Democratic Services now have a standard way of presenting in the minutes those that attended in virtually, and those that have provided apologies. So I'd like our minutes to reflect that new standard, please.
And apologies, but it is just the wording. The wording says the senior solicitor advised the legislation did not allow for members to attend meetings and vote, and there is therefore no scope for local arrangements to allow for this. And that actually looks, it should say attend meetings virtually and vote.
Yes.
I think that was my advice to the meeting. I think I did use the word virtually, but that should be corrected.
So if we can make that amendment as well. Any other corrections? So can I just see show of hands, please, to accept the minutes? Thank you. Unanimous. So we move on to agenda 5, questions from members of the public. Are there any written questions, please?
It's none received, Chair.
And members of the council?
None received.
Thank you. So shall we move to agenda item 7, the role and development of the scrutiny function? The item is for the board to consider the ongoing development of the scrutiny function at the council and invite the statutory scrutiny officer to introduce the report, please.
Chair, this is a business item for the committee, and to consider the ongoing role and development of the scrutiny committee following the last meeting when the board agreed its overall strategic objectives. This report sets out the overall role of the scrutiny committees and the specific remit agreed by the council, set by the council. And it also includes the objectives which were set at the last meeting as amended, as well as the overall specific objectives of scrutiny's development, upon which next year the board may undertake an overall review and evaluation of the scrutiny function. So it sets that framework out. Overall, it could be said that the scrutiny committee's function is to provide demonstrable accountability, the executive cabinet as a council, and to provide a vehicle for non-executive members to contribute to policy development and review. And so all of those objectives are really about how we can enhance the effectiveness of that function. And the board's remit, one of its remits, is to take oversight of that, both for itself and the other scrutiny committees within it. So those objectives and the specific sort of actions and outcomes are in the report for agreement.
Thank you. So do I have any members that wish to comment on the report? Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. At our pre-meeting the other week, there was an issue that the scrutiny officer brought up on access to information, the fact that the Constitution wasn't clear on it. I don't see anything in this particular paper about where we as a scrutiny management board would have the opportunity to review the Constitution and to offer recommendations for improvements if we feel it's actually hampering the work of the scrutiny committees.
Can I maybe refer to our legal counsel?
So that amendments to the Constitution aren't actually within the remit of scrutiny management. They would be within the remit of the Audit and Governance Committee. So I would suggest a question could be put to the Audit and Governance Committee that application needs to be considered.
Okay.
And I know the particular instance in which it did come up, I have amongst my many papers, the constitutional element in relation to the budget. And it is actually very clear within the Constitution. Let me see if I can find it. In section 4.5.30 and 4.5.31. So it is very clear that scrutiny does have the opportunity to ask for information to consider in relation to budget and policy framework items, and that it goes into further detail in section 4.5.31. So, but I think perhaps write a resolution that it is something that board and governance consider. One thing I would like to propose in relation to that is when we get onto our one of the things that I've identified in the role and development of the scrutiny function is historically we had an executive scrutiny protocol arrangement, which outlined how scrutiny members communicated informally with the cabinet and also officers in the background, that not part of the normal committee. And I think since this new structure has been implemented, we don't have something like that anymore. So one of my recommendations, perhaps to counter your point, is that we ask for a resolution to have a paper come to our future committee meeting that outlines this protocol. And within that, if that identifies the areas of the Constitution that perhaps needs further clarification, we can then use that paper to evidence the areas that perhaps we can refer to audit and governance to consider making the changes. With that, do you think that would?
I don't mind how we do it, Chair, as long as we do it.
Councillor Watson, I believe you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Alice whereabouts the Local Government Act of 2000 sits in with this, and with the recommendation to audit and governance, is that also, you know, because the Local Government Act of 2000 and Section 9F gives executive arrangements by a local authority to ensure that scrutiny committees has the power to review or scrutinise decisions made. And I'm just wondering, so is that covered as well through our constitution and through by going through audit and governance? It's kind of like also picking up Councillor Stark's, as he says, he doesn't mind how it's done, but it's about how it is done, you know, and making sure that all the bases are covered.
So the power to scrutinise. The power to scrutinise decisions is within our constitution, Section 9F, although not verbatim, is taken into Herefordshire Council's constitution. That is to do with scrutinising decisions rather than requesting information, but that is present in our constitution already.
Great, thanks Alice.
Okay, so would everyone be comfortable if I put a resolution that we request the development of an executive scrutiny protocol that encapsulates how we communicate and how we request information, and if there are and for that also consider whether there are any weaknesses in our constitution that perhaps could be improved, and then from that we can make recommendations. Would everyone be happy with that resolution? Yeah. I can see a hand. Great, thank you. Any other comments on the document role and development of the scrutiny function? I have Councillor Harms and Councillor Singlehouse.
You seem to be coming on. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask some questions on our role, in particular, the role of the Scrutiny Management Board and how we address umbrella issues that are a matter for this board, and those include staff group retention and the budget, for example. But some of those are also very specific to individual scrutiny committees. So I think it'd be good to get some clarity on what it is this board looks at and what individual scrutiny committees could look at. So, for example, Children's Services budget is more detailed than the budget I guess we look at as a management board. And also looking at, we've got a task and finish group, which is currently in the process of being set up to look at staff retention and recruitment in the Children's Services department. So presumably those are still valid for us to do as independent scrutiny committees as a subset, if you like, of the main corporate objectives of the Scrutiny Management Board. I just think a bit of clarity about what individual committees can do under headings that look as if they're the role of the management board, but actually also have an important function of individual committees to look at in more detail.
And I think that's the real importance of our next agenda item, which is looking at the work programmes, because we'll see all the work programmes under one umbrella, and then we can make those discussions more clear. So, for example, if we have HR items potentially coming into our November meeting, and when we delve into our lines of inquiry there within our work programme, we can also then see that you in your scrutiny committee might have other elements, and I think it's the next agenda item where I believe we need to pick this up, because that's one of our main purposes, to ensure that we reduce duplication and we make our lines of inquiry as efficient as possible. So I think if I can hold that one to bring up in the work programme session, because I think that's the primary purpose of seeing them all for the first time under one umbrella.
Yeah, I agree with that. And when we look at the work programme, it's pretty clear that there will be stuff that individual committees in that looks if it's the objective of the management board. My suggestion, there should be some wording within this document which says that clearly, that whilst there are umbrella objectives of the management board, individual committees will also look at those same subjects in a more detailed way. And I think there's like a big gap between this document and the work plan. People look at it and say, well, oh, the work plan is saying stuff that looks like it should be under the strategic management board. I just think there should be some clarifying wording which links the two in the document. That was my point. I take your point, we'll look at it, but there isn't a clear reason why you go from what the board looks at and what committees look at. That's what I think could be clarified.
Okay, because I am concerned that we signed up on this document and agreed at our last committee meeting, and we're almost discussing it all over again.
Well, I've asked that question before.
Yeah. So what would you propose would be the exact change that you would like to see as a resolution? Yeah, if you were going to put forward a resolution to change the document, can you propose the wording and where it would go in the document?
Yeah, I would just like there to be some, before the work programme, I think would make sense to say that although there are overarching areas in which the management board looks at, each committee will also look in more detail at areas that particularly affect them, such as budget and staffing in their area, words to that effect at the beginning of the work programme. So when people look at it, the public, they can see why the work programme seems to reflect there's work done that isn't actually properly reflected in the overall objectives or the overall role.
So if I'm looking at page 19 of our agenda pack,
yeah,
which is our board objectives, where and exactly what can you put? We would need sort of a detailed resolution. We need to document a detailed resolution. So where and where would you put it in here, and what would be the exact words so that the committee can discuss?
Okay, I need to come back on that then.
Okay.
Yeah, do that. Thanks.
Because I mean, I would see that the Scrutiny Management Board would have the overall oversight of the budget and the budget process. But I also believe that the individual scrutiny committees need to consider budget items more in more detail during each agenda item. So not the budget, they wouldn't necessarily have a budget agenda item, but it would be more cognizant of budget items within the detail of the report. So I would certainly agree with that. But I think the overall process of the budget and looking at the budget as a whole, I think certainly does need to fall under SMB, because that was one of the primary reasons of moving it from the individual committees just to one committee, to ensure we get a better effective review of the budget. And I think when we get to the budget papers, I think that there is a little bit more work for us to do with cabinet and also with officers to get the scrutiny of the budget more defined for this year.
Yeah, and I take your point. I did raise it some time ago, this particular issue, and I hadn't realised it hadn't been properly covered. I've had another look at the two reports, and I said, oh, I think actually there should be some bridging between the two. Okay. So yeah.
So if I can leave it with you for a couple of minutes to think about it, and I'll go to other members' questions on this agenda item. I think Councillor, do I have Councillor Swinglehurst first, and then Councillor Simmons?
Thank you, Chair. So I have some sympathy for Councillor Howe's concerns here, and actually some of this I think is exemplified in the report, paragraph 6C. In other words, how hard it is to express the relationship between the individual scrutiny committees and the Scrutiny Management Board, and that short précis does nothing to help that confusion, because it sounds as if we are dictating to the board what they may or may not decide to do in terms of the work programme, spotlight, task and finish, etc. That decision making, which is I think that, does that properly reside with this board? But since we have an oversight of all the other boards, or should that really come from the boards and their recommendation of how they feel, the depth to which they wish to look at any particular item, and if they feel that task and finish is the right thing to do, it's not for us to say, no, we think we need to do a spotlight review or whatever. So I think there is still some working through that, and that given that this is a newish sort of work, we're moving into uncharted territory for us, at least, that we need to be prepared to be quite flexible around this and to take on board our learning as we go and to try to adjust. And that kind of in a sense would be the recommendation, so for that each individual member of the Scrutiny Management Board might want to come up with an improvement of language or expression or finessing this, which Councillor Howes would be right to do. Just to express that relationship or to explore that relationship a bit more carefully. I did also have a bit of an issue around sort of where we're looking at council relationships. That again, that can be really complex. It's difficult to get into a little, bullet point, as it were, and particularly on the relationship with people. We need to be at least consistent with that, and if it's described as a council company, i.e. that there is ownership, that's one thing, but we can't then describe it as a partnership, or because I think to the public that would just be really mystifying.
So can you
what is the relationship? So we've got it. So in the report we've got it at 6G in the report as a council company. And then at 4C in the objectives described as a partner. So, and indeed just a briefing note or something for all members who are not familiar with the relationship with people, probably wouldn't go amiss anyway. This is a general idea. And I think, and again, in the objectives in the healthcare and wellbeing section, one of the partners that we will be dealing with very importantly will be the Integrated Care Board. So that needs to be there along with the trust and the CCG. So that is a change that I would ask for, please, because that's it's something that's kind of it's happening now. It's very current, and that's a conversation that we're going to be having. If we can just make sure that when we're talking about the Healthcare and Wellbeing Board stakeholders or external partners, that the ICS is referenced.
Do you need specific patients for that?
No, probably.
Please. And the other thing that occurred to me, and I know this is because this is the process we're going through, and it's quite complicated business, but we mustn't lose sight of, in all these relationships between stakeholders and partners and boards and stakeholders and all the rest of it, the public. And I started to feel like we're kind of slightly losing touch with that relationship and how the Scrutiny Management Board and Scrutiny boards work with the public. So that's just a sort of a general note that it can become too internal, introspective. So just, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Councillor Summons.
Yeah, I may be mistaken here, but I always thought the Scrutiny Management Board really was a buffer before it goes to Cabinet. The big issue at the start of this was going from Cabinet to a committee system. And that's what was looked at, and it was decided to go to something in between. So to me, the Scrutiny Management Board is the umbrella that everybody else comes to, and then that goes on, they take that further. You know what I mean? So it's like a buffer between. That's the way I see it. I'm seeing a lot of concern. I understand the concern from chairs and vice chairs of different committees that they're losing control. But I don't think they are losing control. I think they're just gaining control. I think they have to look at it from a different point of view rather than the way they're looking at it. They're not losing control. They're actually getting more control, and they're probably going to get more help from the Scrutiny Management Board. And I think that's the whole intention. So perhaps we need to reinforce that message that you're not losing, or we're not going to be dictating. We are here to help, and we are before it goes to cabinet, then it, you know, we are looking at it for grammar mistakes and all that kind of stuff and see if it, what we think of it too. And you're also, the chairs are also involved in that. So I have a bit of a difficulty understanding a lot of the concerns, quite frankly. I'm not chair, so I won't be, but I think we need to look at that. We're not dictating. The chairs still control their committees, except we're a buffer and we help them. That's it. Thank you. That's my speech.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. Councillor Norman.
Is that working? Yeah, not working? Yes, it is now. It was really to once again raise the business about task and finish groups and where we cite the information that's been collected and learning from them. At the moment, they're all over the place, very difficult to find. I think we need to have a clear place for them, whether it's a folder in the Gov or whether it's wherever, but somewhere very easy to find and probably all together. And in that, I include things like spotlight review and anything else that's been beyond the actual committee work. But there's some good stuff there, and unfortunately, I think a lot of it kind of gets tucked away on the shelf and forgotten about, and it's very useful, and or some of it is, and you'll be able to get at it fairly easily. Not quite sure where that fits in, but if we can find some way to incorporate that particular issue.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Norman. That was one of another resolution that I wanted to talk to members about, and that was I mean, part of our role that we have under section 1B on page 19 is the tracking of the implementation effectiveness of the Rethinking Governance Working Group recommendations in relation to scrutiny. And I know one of the things that Democratic Services have been working quite hard on is the updating of the web pages. So one of the things that I was hoping to put forward to you as a resolution was that we receive an update on the operational improvements from Democratic Services that would say include the work that they've been doing on the website to give us an opportunity to feed some of these ideas into that process, because I know Yolandi and myself were part of the Rethinking Governance Working Group, so we understand all the operational. We've presented some of the constitutional changes at Crewe Council, but we're aware of a number of operational changes that that John and his team have been driving forwards, and some of them are very, very complicated and take quite a bit of time to resolve, such as improving the forward plan process. And they're doing a great deal of work behind the scenes, but members aren't necessarily as aware of it. And I don't want members to lose sight of all the fabulous work that's done under Rethinking Governance. So one of the things, and that might then pull in your point, Felicity, if we can resolve to have an update come to a future meeting, then that will give us the opportunity to feedback on the web pages. So that would be a resolution I'd like to put forward. Would that would that help
Yes.
capture that point of yours?
I think it will, as long as it doesn't get lost, as long as we definitely do pin it down, because we've kind of raised this a few times over the last year or two, and it doesn't seem to pop very far. So yes.
And would everybody else be happy with that resolution? No. Great, thank you. I think I have Councillor Lester and then Councillor Fagan, and if there are no other points, then we'll come back to you, Councillor House, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a brief comment. Just following on from Councillor Swinglehurst's point about participation with members of the public. I happen to think that our website is uncomplicated, and 3 or 4 clicks usually gets you to what you want to find. But then what you then find is the business of the day is not buried as such, but remains in the text of the agendas. And sometimes if you're not knowing what you're looking for, then there's a lot of scrolling and clicking to find what we're talking about. And I think a scrutiny committee and scrutiny committees could benefit from the website being more proactive in publishing what is going on. And, you know, we have weather warnings, and we have information that flags up on the screens, the title pages, things like that. And, you know, it might be refreshing to see something like next week Scrutiny is talking about the budget, or some things like that, to be more proactive in reaching out to members of the public to show what we're actually focusing on. So there's some food for thought there, really, in response to thinking, how is this scrutiny process going to be more in touch with members of the public?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lester. And I think that reinforces the point. I think we do need democratic services to come back to us and provide us an update with the work that they're doing in this area. And then that provides us the opportunity for them to feedback and appropriately capture some of these ideas and information. So thank you very much for that, Councillor Lester. Any other, Councillor Fagan? No?
Yes, fine, thanks. The points have actually been made by my colleagues.
Okay, great. Any other points before we return to Councillor Howes to confirm the resolution that he'd like to make to our objectives? Yep. Councillor Howes.
I haven't finished doing the wording, but I think what we ought to be doing at the beginning of the work programme. So I was looking at the clauses. I think we look at, I think it was an appendix. Yeah, key objectives for the Council Scrutiny Committee is Appendix 2.
What page are you on, please, Councillor Howes?
Sorry?
What page are you on?
So let's just talk about this. I'm on page 23.
Thank you.
Which is Appendix 2,
yeah,
which has key objectives for the Council Scrutiny Committees. And now we're coming back to the committees now. I think under the heading, the role of scrutiny, we ought to relate that back to this paragraph 6, where there's an umbrella role for Scrutiny Management Board. And I still think about the wording, but underneath here, we ought to say that each of the committees has a role to look in more depth at some of the umbrella areas, such as budget, staffing, and partner organisations, and that it's up to committees to consider, individual scrutiny committees to consider areas in greater depth that they will wish to explore, and they have the right, whatever word we want to use, to do that under their role and objectives, to look in more detail at issues that affect that particular committee. I need to put that in more succinct wording, but that's the effect I'm trying to create. It takes a few minutes to think that through, sorry. Do we agree in principle?
Do people agree in principle on that point and allow myself, Councillor Howes and Michael to come up with the correct wording? Show of hands on that one. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
So any other points on this agenda item? Before we move on, Michael, are you able to just confirm the resolutions from this agenda item, please?
Yes, Chair. So the resolution on behalf of the Chair is that the general role and remit of the scrutiny committees and progress in the development of the scrutiny function be noted, and key objectives for 2022-23, the Council Scrutiny Committees and the Council Scrutiny key objectives, Scrutiny Committees to key objectives 2022-23, with identified outputs and activities be agreed, subject following amendments, that a executive scrutiny protocol be drafted, including how scrutiny communicates and requests information, that the references to CCG, clinical commissioning groups, to read Integrated Care Board, and to receive an update on operational improvements from democratic services on the website.
Rethinking governance.
On Rethinking Governance.
Which includes the website.
Which includes the website. And that the objectives include that each of the committees, scrutiny committees, consider issues in greater depth, the wording to be rephrased by the Chair in consultation with the scrutiny officer on behalf of the committee.
Is everyone comfortable that encapsulates the discussions for this agenda item? Councillor Stark.
I think Councillor Swingle has wanted us to tidy up some of the descriptions. Company partners, etc.
Yeah, things in the report.
It's not a major one, but it just needs tidying up.
Yeah.
What,
But it's in the report, isn't it? So yeah, I was just saying for future, we need to be clear whether or not we want to take a recommendation on Hoople, the relationship with Hoople particularly, but for all scrutiny board members might be useful. Could we touch at that point, you know?
we do, because we do have a Hoople in our work programme for January.
Yeah.
So is that something that that you would like
We are.
the governance?
Yeah. Okay. It will come through as that then. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so can I get a show of hands that we're all in agreement, please? Thank you. Great. All right, so we move on to agenda item 8, annual scrutiny work programme. This item is to formally agree the annual scrutiny work programme for 22-23, made up of the scrutiny work plans of the council's 5 scrutiny committees. Do we have an introduction?
Yes, Chair, just briefly to say, this is the scrutiny work programme for all of the scrutiny committees, including this board. So it's just all brought together in one place for transparency for yourselves as councillors and also officers to see all of the work that's been undertaken across the scrutiny committees. The individual scrutiny committee will manage their own scrutiny work programmes within it, so they may vary and adapt those, but this is the statement of intent being set. There are a couple of corrections to it. One is a minor correction on page 50. There's an officer reference to Florence Churchill, who no longer works at the council, so that is proposed that be removed. And also, I think Councillor Stark has an amendment for accuracy under the Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee work plan.
Thanks, Chair. It's page 14 and it's the first entry on page 14 under the Herefordshire local plan. I think what's happened, Chair, is that the original agreed entry under the local plan has been supplanted by this entry when this entry should have been added to it. So the original entry has to be reinstated along with this one. I've got a draft here. I don't know whether you want me to read it out.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
And I think for clarity, it's page 55 of the public pack, but page 14.
14 of
the actual
appendix
work
1.
plan.
Yeah. This has already been agreed by the ESSC. It's just a matter of completeness to include it again. So where the Herefordshire local plan does say to consider the analysis of the public consultation local plan, and so forth. Before that, we should re-enter the original item that we agreed on our original work programme, which is to consider the Herefordshire local plan 2021 to 2041, which includes the planning framework for the county, housing provision, the economy, retail and town centres, infrastructure provision, and the environment. Specifically to consider, does the preferred spatial option lead to sustainable communities, including promoting active travel and reducing car journeys? And the second point, specific point is the rural assessment scoring system used for allocating housing development across rural wards robust and supported by evidence? Question mark. So it's not a new item. It's simply reinstating the original item that was agreed and then adding this as a further point to be considered on the 21st of May, 21st of September. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. So I invite members to make comments on the work programme, starting with Councillor Smallhurst.
Thank you. And again, it's just a presentation comment that the column headed cabinet members needs to have some other heading because you've got members who are not cabinet members. And I think that will lead to confusion in the minds of the public. So either have it as key members or cabinet members and other key members or something like that. And we even have in some places cabinet members being referred to as cabinet members and then other cabinet members not being referred to as cabinet members. So if you don't actually know who everybody is, you're going to get really confused.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments on the work programme? of the SMB or other scrutiny? Yes, Councillor Hitchner, and then Councillor Cummins.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments, if I may. I read through this report. I think it's excellent to have all this on all together. So I congratulate the committee on coming up with this work programme, this all in the public domain. So it's excellent. I must confess, I haven't spoken to my individual cabinet portfolio holders to find out whether they're aware of when all these reports are required. I may have missed something. Yes, this is in the public domain, but I'm not sure. Certainly, I'm not aware of a direct conversation that I've had with my cabinet colleagues to make sure they're aware of their responsibilities in respect of each of these items. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, which will make that communication all the more important. Then just one specific item for the committee that's looking at farming. It's on page 17 of. We have to add a few,
Page 58.
41 to it to get to, right. So it says Herefordshire farming, and I looked at that and I thought, well, what's the status of farming going to be over the next 6 or 9 months? There's a crisis with food in the world with the Ukraine. We've got the energy issues. Farming and elm is being introduced, and who knows what the impact of that is going to be. And I wonder whether the committee is able to look specifically at the items they've referred to here without a global, broad brush look at what's happening to farming in our county. I think that would really something which I think would be really appreciated. And I noted the external witnesses here are Farm Herefordshire, and I know there are farmers within that group. And then the Wireless Foundation. I mean, to me, I think perhaps at the NFU or the CCLA, someone like that ought to be involved in this. If we're getting expert witnesses, and I certainly as leader of the council, I'd like to see Scrutiny Committee looking broad terms about the impact of farming on our community over the next five years or whatever. So that's, and I suppose the other point was whether the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee have the officers have the capacity to deal with all the reports they're being asked to produce, and I just asked that that be considered again between probably it's a conversation between officers and cabinet and the Scrutiny Committee chairs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hitchner. If I can deal with your first one first, and perhaps invite Councillor Stark.
You could do Councillor Watson first.
Or did you want to respond though to? I think Councillor Watson has a question. Did you want to respond to?
Yes, okay.
Councillor Hitchner?
Yes, Leader, the work programme is a living document. I appreciate any input from anywhere. If you want to email us, then I'll be quite happy to have that considered by the committee when we look at our work programme on the 21st of September. The issue, of course, is how broad do you make it before it becomes a capacity issue for us to deal with and for officers to report on. But at least let's have the debate. And so if you want to put your comments to us, then it will be on the 21st of September agenda. Happy to look at it, Leader. So send us an email and we'll look at it.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. And then Councillor Howes, in terms of the question around children's, because I think that was one of the questions that I had as well. And I know we've talked about it many times in the past, but it's just understanding. I appreciate this is the overall work programme and the plans will evolve, but similar to how Councillor Hitchner put it, and he's probably far more eloquent than I am. But every other scrutiny committee has really tried very hard to I guess try and fit their programme into 4 meetings as much as possible. And I know every chair has got very difficult decisions to make because they believe everything is equally as important and they want to be able to scrutinise everything. And it's not that's under our current resourcing, and we're seeing in the budget papers because the pressures that we're under, that's not always achievable. And so I guess I wanted to have a bit of a pushback too as well in terms of your work programme and whether there is any way that will also answering Councillor Hitchner's question about the resourcing from an officer's perspective, but also whether there's any way we can maybe align it more to, because there's so much external scrutiny over children's at the moment, is there any way we can align it more to, say, the improvement plan, or the thing that, you know, really is going to make a difference to try and focus the mind on certain points within children? So if you're able to respond to that sort of.
Yeah, I think there's two elements to that. We already had a work programme before the Scrutiny Management Board was set in place. That was rolling forward at least a year. So we've been aiming to reconcile our existing work programme with the new work programme, if you like, that's come out with a wider remit of the Scrutiny Management Board. And that does take some time in changing what we agreed to do, to reconsidering it all. So we're still going through that process. And I think we've also got a great team working with Scrutiny, to Michael and Steve Tucker, our clerk, Bill Burlingham, and that's a fairly new setup between us. And we're going through all this detail and refining the programme, and in particular, so for example, we were going to look at placement sufficiency in our last meeting. And we realised that to ask for that and a core preparatory report and the key measures report we were going to do, that was just asking too much. So we agreed to drop that from that particular meeting's work programme, and we're going to the rest of the programme in the same way. So it's still a work in progress, as Councillor Stark said, but we're very mindful of that, and we've already taken steps to say what actually should we be looking at, rather than what we would like to look at, which add value, but which are critical areas, particularly given that we've got an improvement plan we have to help deliver. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but we're still making those adaptations, and we know we need to. It's a good point. Hope that answers it okay.
Thank you, Councillor Howes. I think we have Councillor Watson, who's been waiting awfully patiently online.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have two comments and a question, actually. I just wanted to say that I'm really so happy with this work program, because for me it allows the public to actually see the subjects that will be discussed by the scrutiny committees across the board, and planning is a really good one that's been scrutinised, because it's on the 9th of September by one committee with Connecting Communities, and again on the 21st by another scrutiny committee. And I think that it really shows the synergy of some subjects across the board, and I think that that's a really good thing with the Scrutiny Management Board is bringing, you know, that collective thinking and that front facing for the public. Michael, I'm sorry if I've missed it, but on page 50 of the public report, in Connecting Communities for the 9th of September, I'm assuming that the change of staff was with Flo Churchill, and it's now, I think, Tracy Coleman. So that was a change on that one. And my third point, which is a question actually to Councillor Lester, of the chair of the Connecting Communities, is that I note on page 52 about looking at levelling up, but now that we've now got the announcement at lunchtime today of a new Prime Minister, and from what Councillor Stark has said is that it's an organic, you know, flow document, will that item still be standing? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I think I can confirm, I think page 50 was part of the amendments that Michael walked through at the beginning. But Councillor Lester, if you'd like to respond, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it will be up for our committee to discuss. Don't know, but it's a good point to make, and that this is the consequence of when you have these seismic changes nationally. That you know, I know that there will be change. I now know that the flavour of changes there will be to the planning system. You know, I now know that because of the announcement at 12:30. So that will have ramifications for how our scrutiny committees consider planning. And I know that that the hope is that planning decisions will now be made more locally rather than nationally, but there'll be more announcements about that in due course. But the point is, I think we will have to be flexible, as Councillor Swinglehurst said earlier on, in our agendas as we see over the next coming months how things are going to meander their way into different courses.
Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned it was leveling up, which I was referring to. Sorry, that was a jump on my side. Sorry, sorry, Jonathan.
Yes, but again, with levelling up, you know, it was a policy that may be amended in various ways, because I know that there's concern about local government funding and things like that. So I think we're going to see over the next coming weeks, as you'd expect, a few announcements which will then allow our scrutiny committees to perhaps realign the specific questions that we were wanting to ask with planning, with levelling up, and with a whole host of other issues. Fuel poverty being one of them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. I believe we have Councillor Summers next, and then Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this really fits in with the work program, but I think it does. ModGov, I've always used it for the past 7 years, except recently. It's pretty hard to keep up with it. A lot of the stuff that shouldn't be on there anymore, because there's a whole change in committees and committee names. So I'm not sure who sets that, who fixes that up, or makes the changes on there. So probably government support should be looking at that and seeing what we need on bringing updated ModGov, bring it right up to date. The other thing is there's a lot of task and finish group stuff already in ModGov, but you can't access it. You can tick it off and you should be able to access it, but if you go onto it, there's nothing there. So this would affect work programs, I would think, because if you want to go into a task and finish group, you should be able to go in there and read that task and finish group, which we can't do right now. So it's really urgent, actually, that we do this. This has been going on since we started all these new committees. It hasn't been updated yet. We have a task and finish, which we've been talking about, not updated yet, or it's not there at all. I've ticked them off and they're on my ModGov, but you can't. There's nothing on them when you tick on them. So that's something that we really need for work programs, as far as I'm concerned. So it needs sorting. Thank you.
Perhaps John Coleman, is that something that you might be able to respond to, please?
Yeah, I'm not 100% clear on what Councillor Summers is referring to on the website. I'm happy to take a look at it with him, though. We have updated all of the committees to reflect the new scrutiny structure. You can look back historically to look at, for example, meetings of the General Scrutiny Committee, but it is clearly labelled as being historic. So those are updated. But if I'm missing something, I'm very happy to sit down and have a conversation. Anything that is on the public website should be accessible. Again, if it's not, I'm very happy to take a look at that, perhaps offline, Councillor Summers, if that would be helpful.
Thanks, Sean. So the only thing I can see what I can do on the other side, I can take ticks off myself and use it when I want it. But the task and finish group material, how can we access that?
Perhaps if I could bring my colleague Ben Bohr in, who is slightly more technically gifted with regards to modern.gov, he can probably give you a more helpful explanation.
Thank you.
Ben, you're in the hot seat.
Yes, thank you. Yes, essentially, Case is talking about the app. Modern.gov app. Case has got access to a confidential version of the app, which includes private meetings such as task and finish groups and that kind of thing. So they always show there. Only if you're a member of that original committee would you be able to access those papers. It's a security kind of area. So clearly, there's a need to know, we can add access to that. But obviously, the task and finish group reports do come back through the committees in a public form through the relevant scrutiny committee in due course. And as it has been identified earlier, we clearly need to make sure that those task and finish group reports are available in one central place on the website, so that that's easy to find in any case. But no, we'll look to certainly update and remove anything that doesn't need to be on the app from previous years. Certainly, thank you for that point.
But if the task and finish is on ModGov and you can tick it as one thing, see it, and then you can't get into it, as a ModGov is a council.
I have to go through it at the meeting. We certainly, it's just a security measure. It's not available to the public. It's only for those members of the committee for active management of live papers at the time which is being considered. But we can look into how we can present the reports to you in a better format.
I think you're having access issues to particular ones, if you are able to maybe raise it with Ben after the meeting.
I think everyone's having access to the ModGov one, and that's where we go to find information that's happening in council, or if we've got meetings, full council meetings, etc. If it's a task and finish group, okay, we're
And you're a
talking,
member of the task and finish group, I Councillor Summers.
some of them I was back then, but that's not the point. We were talking about, I'm sorry, my microphone's not working. We were talking earlier about bringing all the task and finish into one place so we can all see them. Well, they're there, but suddenly we can't see them. So
And I
what are
think,
we working at? If it's already there,
and I think what Ben's point is that all councillors can see the task and finish reports that are delivered to scrutiny, but not all members can see the detailed documentation behind that report, because only members of that particular task and finish group legally have access to that information. So the ones where you were a member of it, you should still have access to those, is my understanding. So if you are having technical difficulties with that, I think that's what you need to go and see Ben.
no, I'm not concerned about the ones I have all mine anyway, because I've got them saved. All I'm saying is they're on ModGov. You can tick on, for example, minerals and waste. You can tick on there and you can't get any information about it.
Okay.
Whether you're, and if we're a councillor, we should be able to get that information. That's all I'm saying. It should be available to us. We're now talking about making it available to the public. Yet we can't get on as we can't get it as parish council unless we're on that committee and we've kept it in our own files.
And I
But
think
at the moment,
the information that we're talking about making available to public is the report that goes to scrutiny, not the detail that goes behind it.
I know, but we should still have access to task and finish. If we're on a committee and we want to look at task, we should be able to tick on it here on ModGov and it should come up. Otherwise, it's why have we got it?
Can I get clarification maybe from legal counsel on access to task and finish activity? And whether that's something that needs to.
Thank you. You can only access the information that was relevant at that time. If you were part of that group, I can see no reason why you wouldn't have it now. I think it's a technical issue, which I would suggest you talk to Ben, and I'll liaise with Ben if there is questions around what is accessible and what is not, and we'll get it resolved.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't answer the question for us. So as a committee, we're talking about looking at using the task and finish that are already passed as useful information that we can use now to make our next move on other things. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, but it doesn't make sense if we can't get at it.
Yeah, well, sorry to come in there, but that's absolutely the point I was making, and I think we agreed that it will be made available. It's obviously not fully available at the moment, either to councillors or to the public. And my feeling, and I think we all agree, is that it should be, and it should all be together in one place. So hopefully we can read that. Really.
Is that perhaps a resolution that we need legal and democratic services to come back to us on and clarify?
Yes, please.
So resolution that legal and democratic services will report back to committee on how task and finish, historical task and finish group activity can be shared among members and or the public. And then perhaps that can be included if we do have the update on rethinking governance at, say, the next committee meeting, which includes information on the website, etc. That may be the vehicle in which they can communicate that. Okay. So I have Councillor Norman and then Councillor Andrews. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my main point was a different one. It's really about capacity and what scrutiny committees address. When I was in the Children's Scrutiny Committee, there did seem to be a huge number of sort of required items, you know, reports that had to be adopted, agreed, noted, whatever it might be. And there did seem to be a huge number of them. I don't know if that's still the case, but they seem to take up a lot of room. Not saying not important, they clearly are important. But if you've got one or sometimes two at every committee, actually doesn't leave a lot of room for the issues that are current and that have just come up and that, you know, really need to be discussed in some detail. So I don't know if this is true of all other scrutiny committees where they have these sort of mandatory items that come up. But maybe we can't do anything about it. It just feels to me that they are part of what's filling up the agendas and maybe need to be thought about in some way if there's some other way of looking at them.
And I think that if there's some statutory reports, I'm not quite sure we can do very much about that, but I know part of the executive protocol element is how we communicate with the executive and officers, and also in terms of looking at the forward plan and identifying those elements that may be better off at scrutiny, or those elements that perhaps can be addressed through a member's briefing instead, and then guide that item through the member briefing process so it doesn't clog up meeting agendas. But that's one thing that we have raised, and hopefully we'll be working towards reinstating, is that the regular meeting between scrutiny and cabinet and key officers.
Good. Well, as long as it's being looked at, and if there are other ways of, sort of unloading from the agendas, and that would be very welcome, I'm sure.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Councillor Andrews.
Very much. I'm going to agree with what you just said there. So let's go backwards in my discussions now. Is the quality of the discussion we have is more valuable than having a report sometimes. And sometimes they can be a written report. So I think it'd be a brilliant move for making these meetings shorter and better quality, which would be good. The one thing I'm going to agree with the leader a bit on here for is the work plan's brilliant. I love the fact we've got it. We've got dates and all the things I used to be frustrated with previously, and it's smaller than it used to be. However, I still think it's too big. I still think it's open to failure, which it already has. So we have a date for our child report to come in. It's meant to be here on the 26th, so we can talk about it tomorrow, and it's not. It's not going to be there. So we're going to lose this time already within a valuable work stream of what you've done. So if the work stream on the work plan is really valuable, my question is, what are you going to do to make that happen as a scrutiny committee, to say that that report should be here? Why isn't the director of that period here to say why he's failed? And what are we going to do about it? Because lots of ways you'll say I'll bring in a fortnight. It comes in a fortnight, that'll be 3, could be 4, could be 5. I mean, they're going to go drift and drift and drift and drift to a work plan that I'm going to say, so you're celebrating here as a success, we've got a work plan, and already it's failed.
Yeah.
So what is going to be new about what you're bringing as scrutiny that wasn't in place previously and still isn't in place because it's failed? So in wanting not to put bad news on top of something which is a good bit of work, how are we going to drag in that director to say, why have we missed this report in a period of school holidays when people are available to work, council didn't close, I don't think they did. So why haven't we got that report on the time that he agreed to do?
Yeah, I think you've raised a number of important issues, and one of the things that I would like to see change in our the way that we do things is that the reports aren't necessarily to the officers, but our report requests go to the cabinet member. Because at the end of the day, as scrutiny members, we are here to hold cabinet to account, not to hold officers to account. So I think we need to shift the burden to the cabinet member, not to ensure that the reports are delivered, and they deliver the report and they are there at our committee meetings to answer our questions. So it should be the cabinet member, and that's why we have Councillor Hitchen here, because unfortunately Councillor Harvey cannot attend today, and we have the budget item on our agenda. Yeah. But I think that is one change that I think we need to move towards, because we are here to hold cabinet to account. The second thing, I think the executive protocol document, which will outline all of this informal activity that goes on in the background, like how we request information, where does the request go to, what's the timeline, ensuring that officers treat scrutiny with the same importance as information that might go to cabinet. So it's building and agreeing and having that discussion amongst everybody that will help, I think, ensure that will happen. Because I think you've had an issue with children's, we're just about to discuss an issue with the budget for us. It's happened in other scrutiny committees, and I think you're right, we need to see a change in process. We may not get it right straight away, but I think if we at least are moving in the right direction, we can hopefully see some improvements.
Give a little bit of response to that then. I appreciate your answer there, but it still doesn't come with any an action to go and do something. And that's the bit I'm really looking for, is like, I think your intentions smack on, and I completely agree with it. However, we now need to go say, like, when do we get to see the lead for that cabinet in to come and say that's what we want. So from this one missing the report, it's missing already. So the action from this meeting should be that person attends when. And that's what I'm looking for, really. And I think that's the speed and response that when we're saying about the general public want to see, I think that's what they want to see. You've missed something, so what is the answer and when's it going to happen? And you fix a date to say it's going to be 10, 14 days, or it's going to be that this person appears, or whichever cabinet is, to respond to why we got this delay for something that everybody thinks is important. But we can't let it drift again, and I think we need to have that focus and attention back to serve the people that voters in these positions. That's what I'm after. While I appreciate you can't make it up with discussion, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see something come in and say, if you missed this, then within 10 days, you must come back with something. Not just a sorry, I didn't.
I think our statutory scrutiny officer might.
I thought it was worth mentioning, Chair, that as you'll see from the report preceding this on roles and objectives, additional measures have been put in place, which I think will help. They're not the whole story. So additional meetings outside of the committees with the chairs and the departments, more systematic report request information, so more clarity. That's all been put in place recently. I think it'll take some time to come in stream to improve this. I think there is a legacy issue about scrutiny committees. If you look at it, and some of the committees about missing information going back last year and tracking, for example, recommendations from scrutiny committees. So hopefully some of those additional communications led by the scrutiny chairs in association with the scrutiny officer, talking to the departments, having meetings with the departments on a routine level, routine basis, will help to make sure those reports are on track in the future. It's not the whole story, but I think setting those things up, I'm hoping that will help in this direction.
And at the end of the day, we are holding cabinet to account. So I think the cabinet member needs to take responsibility as well. But up until this point, we've not included the cabinet member in the discussions and in the information requests. So I think this is certainly an action, and it's something that I've discussed with Councillor Hitchener that I think he's in agreement with, is a way that we can move forwards and improve that communication between us and the cabinet members and the officers. So unfortunately, it won't resolve the issue that you're facing right now today with children, but hopefully will resolve the issue for your next meeting and thereafter. Councillor Stark, I believe.
Yes, it's a follow-on from Councillor Andrews. I don't think it's just a case of a report not being there. It's why the report is not there. I think the history of children's services, particularly in the period before even this administration took over, shows that it's very important to get to the reasons why you haven't received something, because that may raise red flags in the scrutiny committee's mind that it's not just a capacity point, but there is something that hasn't actually happened, and that's why the report doesn't exist. And it's that transparency we need to encourage. We are publishing our work programmes, Councillor Andrews, so we have been upfront, we have been transparent. My committee has said, here's our work programme, comment on it, tear it apart, do whatever you want with it. I'm quite comfortable with that. We have been transparent. We need that transparency in return. So it's not just a report not being there. I think we should be able to demand an explanation for why the report hasn't happened. And if they just say capacity, I think that needs to be probed, because it could mask something more underneath that we need to know as scrutiny committees.
And I think Councillor Hitchener may like to respond, and then Councillor Howes and Norman.
Yes, I think in this new beginning, those sorts of questions will be addressed to the cabinet member. You know, why, cabinet member, have you not delivered at the moment that explained initially? I'm not sure that my cabinet colleagues know when all these reports are to come forward. So working with the chairman, we'll end up with something. So the criticism will come to the cabinet member, who will then turn to the officer. If his officer's failed, then and I think that's the appropriate route, which we'll be looking to. So hopefully that'll come up with some better results. Councillor Stark, thank you.
Councillor Howes.
Yeah, I think it's worth elaborating on points Councillor Andrews made and Councillor Stark. And you said about the children's scrutiny, we've been punctilious in trying to make sure we don't ask for stuff that can't be delivered. So if you remember at the last council meeting, I asked for an undertaking for the cabinet member that we would get for tomorrow's meeting the key measures in a way we'd ask them to be produced that we could look at to say, is this the way we want to monitor the key measures of the improvement plan? And as part of that, with myself and Michael Carr and Steve Tucker, Michael Carr produced a report well in advance of the meeting to say, this is what we like, and the DG looked it together, we produced it, and we were expecting 3 reports. We took one out, corporate parenting, the transformation budget, and the ways in which we were going to scrutinise the improvement plan. Documents set up well in advance. So on the day we had to send out the notice, which was actually the Friday before the bank holiday, we'd received none of them and not told why. And I'm sure everybody has great intentions of wanting to do it, but there's clearly a gap in communication between the commitment we actually got from the cabinet. We asked that question specifically to say, can we have that commitment? Because if it wasn't possible, we wouldn't have had the commitment. So the officers knew, cabinet member knew, and somewhere along the line, we were faced with a decision on a Friday afternoon, and I was, to make a decision to cancel the scrutiny meeting for the 3rd time, because we hadn't had reports, we didn't know why we hadn't got them. I tried to ring all the people concerned to say, I'm about to do this, and there was nobody available to talk to because we expected to get them. So there clearly is a communication requirement that needs to be vastly improved, because we generally thought we'd gone through all the checks and all we asked each other the questions. Have we done the right thing? Have we warned people, given enough notice, given detailed reports, given them spur deadlines we want them by? We'd even said that some of the stuff can follow, knowing that there would be staff problems in producing. We said the one report, which is obviously scrutinising the report we need to have to go with the gender details, because the public needs to see that. The other reports were stuff we were going to be work in progress, so we weren't actually scrutinise them. It was actually what we were going to scrutinise against, so they could follow, and none of them came. And I don't think there's anybody's sort of negligence or incompetence. It's just that the communications gap just exists, and we were extremely frustrated and having to cancel again. So that does really need to be seriously addressed, exactly as both Councillor Andrews and Councillor Stark said. And there's a classic example of just how it all went wrong, despite thinking we'd done absolutely the right thing and taken into account the resource issues and the issues that might be in producing it. And that's quite frustrating.
Yeah. And I think it's an issue that has been raised with Councillor Hitchener and also has been raised with Paul Walker. Hopefully by moving forwards and spending some time thinking about this executive protocol agreement, executive scrutiny protocol agreement, how it should work in the background, we all have collective agreement on that. Yeah. We then have a structure to move forwards. And then if things don't happen, we then are in a position to hold a cabinet member to account, which is why we're here.
Yeah.
So I think that resolution is what we've put forward.
Yeah.
Right. Did I have a hand over here before I go back to Councillor Summers? I don't think so. No, I'm missing you, Councillor Watson, helping me here by my side. Councillor Summers.
I haven't got a mic. All I'm going to say is this is why we have a scrutiny management board. What's happening right now is a perfect example why we need it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers.
Actually, can I just add one quick point? Sorry, it's sort of self-evident really, but it's not just getting the report, it's getting it in plenty of time. And I think that's what's also endlessly been an issue over time, is not just for these very formal meetings, but across the board, getting them in time to read them is so important. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I think it's bears repeating.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any other comments now on the annual scrutiny work programme? One last thing, comment that no one has raised, which I would like to raise, is I would agree with everybody. This is fabulous that we've got an annual scrutiny work programme, but already around the board, we know that there's going to be changes to it. Because plans are dynamic, they need to be agile to respond to certain things. I don't propose that every committee meeting we get this work programme back to us, because I don't think that is particularly effective. What I would like to propose is that perhaps we have a scrutiny activity progress report that comes to us that might have the action from our previous meetings, because we have raised a number of resolutions today. It would have any recommendation tracking if we raise recommendations to the executive, but it would also then give an opportunity just to outline what any changes in scrutiny committee plans, so we are at least aware of the plans going forwards, but not having to approve a new work programme every time it comes to committee. And then I think at the end of the year, we when we look at what we've achieved and what each of the individual scrutiny committees have achieved, we'll have this work programme, which we had at the beginning of the year, but then we'll have some of these progress reports behind that then that we can look to and say, well, this is how we started off the year, thinking this is what we would look at. Number of these events happened throughout the year, which are reported in our progress report, and we're now where we are at the end. So that's what I would like to propose in terms of how we monitor this work programme going forward. Is everyone in agreement with that? Yeah. Great, all hands, thank you very much. Right, so that finishes the discussion on the annual scrutiny work programme. So can I just confirm with the statutory scrutiny officer if there are any other resolutions that we need to vote on, or any other actions as a result of this agenda item?
The resolution is as in the recommendation in the paper, plus the proposals that have been put forward in the meeting.
And the proposals, is that just the resolution around the scrutiny activity progress report, or were there any other?
You also proposed that Legal and Democratic Services report back to committee on how historical task and finished group information reports can be made more accessible. And that report requests for items on the work programme include cabinet members. And that a progress report brought back to the committee to include updates, recommendation tracking, and updates to the scrutiny work plans throughout the year.
Okay, everyone comfortable and in agreement with those resolutions to this agenda item? If I can see a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. That's everybody. Lovely. Last agenda item. Right, agenda item 9, which is budget scrutiny. So this agenda item was to consider the council's budget priorities for setting for 22-23. And if you excuse me, my computer has just gone to sleep. Right, so before I introduce this item, or ask for this item to be introduced, I just would like to raise a few points on the budget setting progress update. So in our work programme, which we've just talked about, we identified the elements of the budget that we wish to scrutinise at this meeting. And this work programme took considerable amount of members' time to develop, and also has been circulated with the senior leadership team. Our work programme did go to CLT. And on the 4th of August, we asked that we receive 5 reports at committee today. So the reports that we did ask to be delivered were the financial outturn for 21-22, the final budget position plus an overall performance report for the year, the budget priorities, positioning assumptions and risks informing the development of the budget proposals for 23-24, how the budget priorities and plans link to the council priorities, the arrangements and overall timetable for the scrutiny of the budget proposals for 23-24 for agreement in 23, and the plans for consultation on the budget proposals for 23-24. And all those elements are also outlined in our work programme. The paper that has been delivered today outlines very significant issues and pressures faced by the current administration that will impact budget priorities. And it is very important that we discuss these. However, in order for the committee members to fully engage with this information, I believe that the information that was requested well over 6 weeks ago really does need to be delivered. I also feel that the questions that the administration would like us to discuss from paragraph 24 onwards requires greater attention than just a 1 to 2 hour meeting. And I feel these need to be considered for future work programming sessions. As I identified earlier in the meeting, it is clear within our constitution that we have the authority to consider any budget and policy framework items, and the legislation does allow scrutiny committees to request the information of the administration. So I would like to propose to the committee that we seek a commitment from a cabinet member that the information we have requested is provided, so we can reconvene early in October to discuss the significant issues facing the administration, including their position statement on each of these issues. It is something that I spoke to Councillor Hitchener and Mr. Lovegrove and also Paul Walker about prior to this meeting. And I think there is a general agreement that they would like to deliver the papers that we believe we need. And it's something that we can work towards over the next 4 weeks to ensure we have the right papers at our meeting on October. But I just wanted to hear your position on this and whether you agree with this before we move on. So anybody wish to comment? Councillor Swinglehurst.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do agree, because it was pretty plain in the request what information we needed, and I always find budgets are quite a challenge, and I need to know stuff around it to understand how it sits. So yeah, I really do need that information. The other thing, if possible, in presenting it, contextualizing is also really helpful for me. When we're looking at, say, reserves, you know, if we're snapshot, this is what we've got. I need to know over a bigger context than that, because I don't know, is that good? Is it bad? Is it less or more than it was previously? So that you have a sense of a narrative around it. Probably tracking back as far as the start of the austerity and the decline in government funding, because this is a long story. This is not just now. This is, and we need to understand where we are in the whole picture. For me, I'm kind of a narrative thinker. If that could be provided as well within the report, the context of the, because it's difficult. We're clearly facing tremendous challenges, and if I can have that contextualised as well, I'd be very appreciative of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. My issue with the information that's been presented is I don't think I've got a baseline. I mean, I could go back to what the MTFS was for last year, because I'm concerned to know how the situation has deteriorated.
Yeah.
I know we've got issues. I know we're presented with risk and with assumptions and with the pressures. I want to know how that is different from where we were when we started with the MTFS for 21-22. So I think that's quite key, is having that comparative baseline to say, this is what we were hoping would be the picture if things had progressed as we expected from 21-22 to, I think, 25-26. I know it's an extra year on, Chair, but that's missing. And that's what makes it difficult for us to just have a debate on this particular paper. Because if you said there's a lot of elements of that information that we asked for that we don't have, that does give you that contextual picture. And I think that's what we've got to get across. We need that contextual picture so that we can have a debate within that to say, well, this is where we were, why we got to where we got to now, and then we can actually say, yes, it's external pressures or whatever, and that helps us in our debate as a committee. Just simply to discuss these figures as they exist, and they are frightening, don't get me wrong, we should not have some discussion on it. It's context to see how the position has got worse since we last discussed it in full council in February and March of this year. So I do agree with your basic proposition, but we didn't ask for that information just plucked out there. We did want that context, Chair, and I think that's what we still need in order to have a proper rounded debate on this.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. So then I have Councillor Norman. Any others before I then refer to Councillor Hitchener, Councillor Summers? So Councillor Norman, Councillor Summers, and then if there are no other more comments, then maybe ask for a response by Councillor Hitchener.
Thank you. Well, comments well made by previous speakers. I agree with those points very much. But I think in a way it kind of refers back to some of the points we've been making about the delivery of what we need, basically. I, for one, I think we're probably all the same, find budgets difficult, no question about it, not my strength by any means. And I think the whole point about the questions that we asked for were very much to try and enable us to understand, looking at what we needed to know, you know, how we were trying to sort of look at and understand what was before us and what it would mean. So it is really important. We didn't ask them lightly. We do need them, and I think this is where we are, if you like. But it's also to do with, if it's not possible, why not, and getting some response, not what we asked for, but either what we asked for or some clear explanation of why we haven't got it.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Councillor Summers.
Yeah, I just have a problem with figures anyway. I know my wife, when we went to business, she'd just call me and say, sign there, and I sign it. We really need to be more resident friendly on these, and any of these reports. So we need to, you know, take some of the jargon out and speak English. And we are public. We are public now, and the public deserve not to have to analyze what we're saying. We need to be making these reports black and white and make it easy to understand. And, you know, at the end of the day, when the budgets actually come out, that's fine, that's a legal document. But the residents need to know in plain language what it's going to cost them, why it's going to cost them. And it's obvious in a lot of cases why it's going to cost them, because we've had COVID and we spent a fortune. But we need to make sure they know that, not just, anyway, that's just my feeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. Any other committee members before I ask Councillor Hitchener to respond? Councillor Hitchener, all yours.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Paulson. So this is a kind of new beginning. I'm sitting in for Councillor Harvey, which is a bit of a tall order, but it should be the cabinet member who responds to this committee. And then we are all so dependent on the officers, and in particular in the area of finance. Councillor Harvey's got a finger on most of the buttons on this, but he's very dependent on the Section 151 officer. We've had two councillors who've acknowledged they're not aces at finance, but ultimately, you know, it's a really fundamental thing. You don't have to look at the press very much to see councils are failing across the country, because people are making silly decisions, and we need to be looking after each other. We need proper scrutiny to make sure these sort of things don't happen. It's very helpful to have two contributions from Councillor Stark, Councillor Swinglehurst, about what information you need, and both of you are asking for things which are broad picture things, which I think that's what the committee should be looking at, not going into detail at every single line. And so I think that hopefully will help. Probably Councillor Harvey might be kicking me if she was it was here, but hopefully Mr. Lovegrove will cover me off on that. But we need to know what you need, and it's helpful to have this communication where you're telling us, and we will be having a conversation with the chair to make sure that the next iteration of this paper actually comes up with much more of what you're after. And it won't be perfect. It won't be everything you like, because we'd like something back from you as well, so that we can have some direction going forward. So I think with that, I'll pass over to Mr. Lovegrove from there.
Thank you very much. I'm in preparing for this meeting. I had a number of conversations with Councillor Harvey, and very much as the leader has just said, that she wanted this opportunity to ask yourselves as the committee to work with you to work out exactly what you need. Because we can provide an awful lot of information around the budget. It's our specialist area. We can spend hours going through that, but it's distilling down to what you need and what you require to enable you to do your role to scrutinise, to hold the cabinet to account, and not just Councillor Harvey, but the wider cabinet, because it's have responsibility on there. But as acknowledged, there will be further conversation about trying to provide that clarity as to the broad brush information there. And I think as Councillor Harvey is in the paper, questions that we'd like you to have a look at yourselves as the committee, where you would like to look into detail, or for you to say, actually, thank you very much, we don't want to look into that, we want to look over there. So that sort of clarity, I think, will be very helpful.
Thank you. And I think I have Councillor Lester with his hand up. Sorry, I missed you, Councillor Lester. It's a bit difficult for me to see the screen. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Not a problem. I know how difficult it is. Yes, one of the pleas is obviously more information, and the more context we have, the more members can understand things, and also the sooner that information is provided, the better we have a situation where, if members don't understand the way the information is being presented, there's time to get officer clarification, rather than be thrown these documents, you know, within 7 working days or whatever it is, and then not understand them and not have the time to query with officers what they mean in the context of everything. So the more information, the better, the sooner the better. But I think one of my pleas would be that with respect to Mr. Lovegrove, who works exceptionally hard with these things, it's not all done at the last minute, and there's plan A, plan B and plan C. And I think for scrutiny and there's plan A, plan B and plan C, usually because there's government settlements that are only announced at the 11th hour. But surely to goodness, what would really help the scrutiny process is if you had draft proposal scenarios, and as soon as possible, so that we can really start to scratch our heads about what that would look like if we went down that avenue. In the past, it's all been guesswork until the last minute, and then full on, to the extent that certain scrutiny committees had to scrutinize budgets without any figures, you know. So I think what we really need, what would really help, is if the administration provided drafts with the understanding that these drafts may change. And I don't think that's impossible to achieve, but I welcome Mr. Lovegrove's comments.
Mr. Lovegrove. Or maybe I should ask Councillor Hitchner first.
No, that question was directed at Smith.
Chair, if we lived in a perfect world, we would have all the information at our fingertips now to make the decisions. But as Councillor Lester mentioned, we have to live in the real world, and the financial settlement, it's been worked upon by civil servants. We know that there has been a change in the Prime Minister, so there will be changes in the cabinet, and we will or may not get another budget. So we have to recognise there are things that are changing all the time, right up until the meeting when you, as councillors in February, probably in this room, have to make a decision around the budget. And the reality is that has to be a decision without every single piece of information in place. It is always an exercise in having to make assumptions. So I recognise that. Councillor Lester makes the valid point about talking about scenarios. And again, I think Councillor Harvey was in the room. That's why she wanted to engage with you about which areas to work together on scenarios, which areas that you felt the administration on its own should look at, things you'd want to look at as a committee. But I'm also conscious that we are in a political environment, and with different political groups in the county may want to keep some of their cards closer to their chest on there. So it's a recognition that it's quite a complicated process that we're trying to help you through.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate, so I think we're all on the same page now. I think we all agree that I think we need further documentation to come before the committee in good time, so we can review it before we can really give justice to the figures. So I think we have got that agreement amongst both cabinet member and committee members. Before we close out this budget item, then are there any last comments?
Yeah, sorry.
Councillor Andrews and then
I'm not
Councillor
going to let Mr. Lovegrove off that quite easily.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
It's like it's great that Councillor Harvey's actually putting questions in the report for us, so I'm going to ask him to be honest. So so you see the council tax is basically going to be flat for 4 years then, because it sort of doesn't really go up to any great increment across there, which is okay. Lots of people will be very happy for that. But the question about our borrowing power and are we not using it wisely enough is like, okay, what should we be borrowing against? And it's now the current time to be borrowing money. We're seeing inflation go up, interest rates are obviously going to go up. So I'd be very grateful for you to give us a little bit of an explanation, as you probably helped to create this report as well, where we think we could borrow money, where from, to do what value that will give us back as a county. The income streams, again, something I've been questioning for a long time, is like what income streams can Herefordshire Council create that will bring wealth back into it, which avoids the revenue having to go into council tax being that big income coming through. And the last one, which I think is, I'd like to hear a lot about this, the local lottery and how you're going to sort of make that a fundraiser, which doesn't look like a stealth voluntary council tax payment for people to bring in. Because that's what, for me, that would really like. So if you can afford to do the lottery, then you pay the additional tax, then perhaps you should just be taxed differently anyhow and get it that way, as opposed to a voluntary contribution. So I'll leave the floor to you for a while. Thank you.
Is that something that perhaps we can get him to articulate in the papers that come to us? Because I'm just concerned, I don't necessarily want to open this paper up for discussions, otherwise I think we could be here for some time,
Yeah.
and particularly if we need a number of other documents. But is that something that perhaps we can record in the minutes for Mr. Lovegrove to respond to, or would you?
Well, I think I'll leave it to the room to decide what they'd like to do. Either do you want to have a small debate about it now, or do you want to wait? And then, as I've said in my previous question on the previous article, we could wait a long time for a report to come back, or we get it in the time that we can still debate it.
Because I think there have been a number of members that have requested the further information that they believe they would require in order to assess some of these questions. Can I just, I know Councillor Summers, you had?
It's just that I would like information when I'm reading it on what has been spent previous year and how far we are behind.
Yeah, and I think that's the context of asking for year-end information.
So
yeah.
Then the public can see that how difficult it is to make those ends meet, and where we've had to suddenly do a turnaround. I think the public needs to know that in plain English. And I think if we have that up front, then we can discuss it. The public can hear that discussion, and maybe they can understand why we have a budget. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Norman.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, but I think there are a range of interesting questions in there which you'd quite like to discuss. And I think the point is it today, or are we fixing a further meeting to look at the budget and maybe these questions? In the future, I don't really want to have two meetings going over the same stuff, but I absolutely think we want to know more and have that opportunity at some point soon. It's just when, really.
Okay, so I think Councillor Andrews, if you're agreeable, because I know Councillor Swinglehurst raised some things that she would like to see further. I think so did Councillor Stark. So if we can minute those particular questions, ensure that we, because I think myself, Councillor Watson, Councillor Hitchner, and on behalf of Councillor Harvey, and the officers will need to get together to make sure that we get the reports that we need, and we can ensure that that information is included.
I'm going to bring you back then to my disappointment now about we have an agenda item here, which the report has been submitted for, and we could debate, and now we're going to decide not to debate the report that's been submitted. Like Councillor Harvey isn't here, for whatever reason she isn't here. The other people that can talk about it are in the room, and we're deciding not to talk about it. So as Councillor Norman just said, we're now going to have another debate at a later date over something we can't have in front of us now that we're going to agree not to debate. So we had an agenda item that was worthless before we even started getting in the room.
Yes, and unfortunately, this is something that we discussed last week, and I think that unfortunately you weren't able to make the meeting. But it was something that I raised last week, and whether we should actually defer or whether we actually needed to at least have the agenda item so we can discuss some of these issues, because I think some of the issues that we faced with this item is similar to, say, what children have faced with not receiving their reports that they requested, and it's a broader issue than just the budget. And I think it was agreed that we needed to have this meeting so we could, so members of the public were aware that this was the situation, but we really did need to contain the discussion because we needed the right information to put the context around it in order to be able to provide greater, better and more effective scrutiny. So that's the reasoning behind why we're making this action now.
So when will this come back?
October. Councillor Stark.
Yeah, and Chair, to help Councillor Andrews, I think we should have a guarantee today that information will be available by the 1st of October. We're still lacking the big answer to the big question here. In 26-27, we have a potential shortfall that's more than half the reserves that we have in this council. What I want to know out of all this debate that we have, is this council still viable after 26-27? I mean, that's a big question some of these figures throw at us. So when we do come back the 4th of October, we've got to have a guarantee from officers that we will be able to have that debate and answer these sorts of questions.
I think we need the guarantee from a level of commitment from Councillor Hitchener, which I think in his position representing Councillor Harvey, he's going to do his utmost to ensure that we come to an agreement to get the papers that we need.
Yes, I shall be ensuring that Mr. Lovegrove provides what is necessary. We'll be discussing with the chairman exactly what is needed to make sure it is done properly. Just to your point about the reserves and in 5 years' time we'll have eaten half of them. Well, of course, the reserves are not the 100 million. That's the top line figure. They're all allocated. So we know what we're spending most of that money on. Reserves, I'm afraid our position is unfortunately not as good as that. But on the other hand, we don't know what contribution government are going to make. And it's well known that other councils are in a certainly much worse position than we are. It's publicly known. Hampshire, it's 200 million short just next year. We are I think we're probably in the middle of the pack. Mr. Lovegrove discusses the situation with other Section 151 officers around the country, and I think we're kind of middle of the pack. We can keep going. We will have another period of austerity if that ever ended. Let's carry on. And I just ask, make sure that I haven't spoken in any way to.
Yeah, that sort of comparative information is what we're getting at here in this context. It's useful to hear that. I mean, it gives some reassurance that we're not the worst off. It doesn't give a lot of reassurance that we're going to actually still be able to work through this. But that contextual information is what we're asking for. So if it is there, leader, then let us have it so we can help you to try and work through this. That's all we're asking at the end of the day.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. I think we have one last comment from Councillor Howes, and then I think we need to draw this one to a close.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's some really good questions asked here. We haven't done justice to them today at all. We can't, but I think we do need to do justice to them and give our input. I don't know what date it is, looking back, dates there, 2nd of December, our scrutiny summit, for example, to be confirmed. But we ought to, as a group, come back with answers to these questions. And that means we ought to do some work between now and then. I don't know whether a task and finish group to set up of a subcommittee of this group looking at all these questions and then recommending back to this committee what our answers are. So, for example, on 34, do you have any priorities or concerns or comment wishes to make as input? I certainly would in children's scrutiny, like send education and send treatment. And last year we agreed that there wasn't enough in the budget to cover it. We know that's an issue all throughout the country. we've got something like 1,000 children who have special educational needs. We know there's never going to be enough money, but there are things you can do without money to mitigate and actually improve the service you offer with that budget. So I'd like to have a chat about that, for example. That's a specific area for our committee, and I wouldn't be surprised if other committees haven't got a particular area where funding is a problem, but where we've got an increasing demand for services. So I think we should spend some time going through each of these questions and answering them. And to my mind, a task and finish group to do that would be the obvious solution, unless somebody's got a different suggestion. But I do think we need to sit down and come up with some answers, present back to this board, so then when doing the budget, you know what our thought is on each of those questions. And we may have some others we want to ask as well, or give answers to.
And I think this is the critical point of, we've asked for specific information to help us scrutinise, and we haven't yet got that information. So I think we've got the commitment. I believe that we will try and get the information that we require, and we'll get the information in as timely a manner as possible. So then in October, and I think the date that's potentially, which is the next agenda item, is the date of the next meeting, we're potentially floating the 4th of October. It needs to be, we can't delay it too much, because these are serious questions, and if we need to do further work, then we need to know sooner rather than later. But on the other hand, we also need to allow sufficient time for the cabinet member to ensure that the information is collated and we have the right information that we need. So I think the 4th of October has been floated as the next potential date, where we can then analyse the information, discuss what we need to discuss, and then make a decision from there.
So just to follow up, what do you propose that we do to answer these questions? And by the way, I won't be here on the 4th, matters, but there are some particular things about scrutiny I'd like to raise. And it's my holiday week, unfortunately, but part that apart, what are we going to do to answer these questions? Because are we going to do it in a meeting, or are we going to do it so we come to the next meeting with some answers further?
Well, I think we need to have some contextual information first, and have it, the items that we spent quite a bit of time deciding this is the information that we would like to see. We need it sort of in that contextualized point, and I don't think we can do that until the next meeting, because we need that information. So I'm suggesting we gather the information that we need. So we can hold the executive to account for year end, understand where we've got to year end performance wise as well, which will then lead us into being in a better position to analyse where we're going next. And I think some of the previous points of, understanding what happened last year and the year before, I think every year there are always budget pressures, and there are always gaps that need to be, we need to make some of these decisions. This is not, I don't think, necessarily unusual, but there are other factors.
I do think we need that data, but I think we can answer the principle of most of those questions without the specific data. What is our attitude to them? I think that's what we're asking. So I think we could do that separately before we get the data. That's my thought. If other people don't agree, fine, but I would like us to have a formal session to consider each of the questions and what our stance is on each of them, because I think that would guide the information you get as well, actually. So I think
comments and feedback, Councillor Millhurst?
Just is the 4th of definite, or is that no? Because I'm saying that's a problem for me. It's a problem for Councillor Howard as well. I think probably we'll have to look at rescheduling that. I think there's a fine line. I mean, this is really interesting because it's bringing to the surface something that's quite a delicate and difficult area, which is something that was referenced by Mr. Luckley, which is that it's a political arena. And so the information that in a sense I don't feel that my job here is to write the budget for the administration. My job here is to look at the proposed budget and consider is it the right balance of things, and try to be a critical friend, and as far as possible remain in a politically neutral gear with that, because otherwise it does invite the criticism of when one's in a less politically neutral gear that, well, you had it before scrutiny, so why didn't you say that then? So it's kind of complicated, isn't it, around dancing around all this, because it's fair enough if the administration don't want to put all their cards on the table, and plus which there's a load of unknowns and known unknowns and the whole thing anyway, which I think we all understand. But it's finding what is the sweet spot, where is the balance properly between this scrutiny holding the administration to account and looking at a proposed budget or a set of budget options, accepting that there'll be vagueness and flexibility, and then say, well, actually, I don't think there's enough in there for SEN, or there's not enough there for carers or for the environment, whatever. You know, then you can try and make your case as an individual scrutiny chair, but you need to know enough to make that case and to see that there's something that you might spot as a deficiency. And so I think there's a, you know, we're kind of on a bit of a journey of discovery of where is the appropriate level of detail to enable us to be effective in what it is we're trying to do, without straying into kind of political areas which I think is nobody really is comfortable with, and indeed I don't think that would help the functioning of scrutiny generally, and I would seek not to do that. But so the series of questions are difficult because they kind of invite me to write a budget. I don't want to write a budget. I want to scrutinise the budget of the administration.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Councillor Stark.
Yes, I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy with Councillor Howells, because you get questions and you want to do your best by answering them. But I think most of these questions should be addressed to the executive, not us. I mean, read them, Councillor Howells. They're asking fundamentals about how you set the budget. Now, if the executive haven't even answered the question first, then it seems a bit strange that we're being asked the question before the executive has even given us any sort of opinion over what they think about it. Because we're scrutinising the executive actions. They could end up scrutinising ours in this case. Seriously, so I've got a lot of sympathy, Councillor Howells, but I just think we haven't got to the position yet with the budget information to sit back, see what the components are this year and what the pressures and risks are from that, and then perhaps to start maybe giving some guidance as to what we might be able to say about it. But at the end of the day, it's for the executive. They're the ones that are in power, and they should be answering these questions, not us in some respect. So it's a moot point whether we should wait until the executive answers them. Then we come in and scrutinise that. I don't know what you think, Chair. That's what would be my view.
Yeah, I think they are quite leading questions. I would probably have to agree with you on that one, Councillor Stark. And Councillor Norman, please, and if we can maybe wrap up.
Well, I think they're really interesting questions. I'd love to get into a discussion about them. It's where we do it, really,
yes.
Isn't it? And I think what we want as a priority is the questions we ask, the information we ask for. That's what our next meeting should be about. I'm totally not against the idea of some broad discussion relating to those questions. That could be really interesting. Maybe it should be an all-member, you know, briefing of some kind, or opportunity to have a discussion about them, because I think there's some really interesting ideas there, which I'd personally love to hear people's comments on and contribute to. But I don't think it comes into our next meeting or even the next one, given, you know, what we're really supposed to be focusing on.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. And last,
all-day summit.
yeah, I think so. Councillor Lester.
Yes, I find it. I mean, I know it's probably the administration wanting to make this as participatory as possible, but I echo Councillor Swinglehurst's point. Really, it's up to the administration to put forward a budget, and then we scrutinise that rather than us try and write the budget for them. And I would make a plea that. Reiterate that draft scenarios should be presented to the scrutiny committee, even if we accept them as being drafts and the administration may wish to change them. But unless we're given some direction, and I'll give you an example. Let's just suppose that the administration was to say, well, here's a budget that proposes a nil increase in council tax. Here's a budget that is for a 2% rise, and here's one for a 3% rise, or whatever. And these are the consequences to the capital programme, to the investment, and to the running of services. And then, you know, put that information to us, because I think that would be extremely useful, as has been said, not just to the scrutiny committee, but to all members, so that when they come to debate this crucial issue, and this budget, just like the last one, but even more so with the cost of living being such a critical issue, it's going to be crucial that all of these decisions are made with all of the facts and all of the repercussions of making these decisions. So I still think we can be presented with scenarios about what the budget would look like, rather than be in this state of asking questions and asking for people's comments, because our job surely is to scrutinize what's in front of being put forward to us, rather than answer questions about key questions that really is for the administration to put forward for us to scrutinise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. So I think we really have had a relatively robust discussion about this. And I think there may be some differences of opinion, but I think I'm getting the understanding collectively overall. I think we've requested the information. I'm going to work with the cabinet member and the vice chair and the statutory scrutiny officer to ensure we get the right reports for our next meeting. I think the actual date of the next meeting is probably still up for consideration, and I don't know if we need to definitely have a date to close the meeting, but I think probably it needs to be sooner rather than later, because these are quite serious issues. So the first week in October, if we can work maybe towards a date in that first week of October, if we can get general agreement on that, and then I can work with the statutory scrutiny officer to perhaps narrow down a date by email. Councillor Howes.
I just wanted to say that, having heard the debate, I think the idea that Councillor Lester and Councillor Starker said, yeah, the scenarios based on those questions would be a good way to go about it. I just want to make sure we found a way of addressing them, because that is a better way, I think. If you say, like, yeah, okay, those are all the different ways in which you could approach the budget, come back to it, using those scenarios, questions you've asked yourself, and then work through them ourselves. I agree that would be a much better way forward. So we do have a consensus. I can have a discussion.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Are we able to move forwards? One last one, Councillor Cummins.
I just want to go back to my original request, and that's to get to know what was the last budget, how it's been spent up until now, and where we had to make changes or turnarounds. That's vital to know. At least then you can have an idea of what's going to happen following your worst case scenario. So I think we need that information going in. If we don't have that, then we're just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping it sticks.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Great, and I think that was the first item on the information request. Okay, so I think we can please finish.
It's just a warning to the executive. This is the first time this information may have hit the public and the press. I mean, having straw questions such as, is a lottery good for Herefordshire? I hope you've got a communication strategy in place to actually handle some of the queries you might get from that on Facebook or in the press. Because that's what worry does when we had our meeting was, if this is hitting the press, then it could create a lot of questions, unfortunately.
Those questions will be good.
I was kind of waiting for an opportunity to respond a little bit.
Councillor Hickner.
You give me one, Councillor Stark, thank you. We are on a journey. We are doing things differently. We're trying. In our administration, it's always been a bit late by the time we got to the budget, and the communication was poor. So we are doing our best now to bring everything forward. It's not perfect, but that's what we're trying to do. And we'll continue to work to try to bring things forward as much as we can. If we wait until the final budget is set and then we come to you, it's obviously too late. And Councillor Lester's made the point that maybe some scenario planning might be appropriate. So all these are all ideas. I think for me the key top line is this gap, this potential 20 million which we had to close, and we're interested in anybody's ideas for these things. Is it a good thing to have a lottery? Is it bad? I happen to have a particular view which people don't necessarily agree with, but anyway, so there are all sorts of opportunities. And we want to make sure we don't miss the opportunities. If there are other things which this committee has, we'd like to come out and suggest, we'd like to hit them as early as possible. We are not perfect. There's a huge deficit. It's a national problem, and you know, it's going to work out with the new Prime Minister. We'll see what she comes up with. She might help. I suspect she might find that quite difficult, but yeah, so it's working together. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring things forward so there are no huge surprises. And you know, I think with a new relationship, we can hopefully see things improve.
Thank you, Councillor Hitchner. Just in terms of administration, because we haven't discussed the report, do I need to get agreement from everyone that we are the resolutions that we've, or the agreements that we've got with Councillor Hitchner to move forwards to bring this back in to the 4th of October? Do we need to vote on that, or
Well, they've been minuted,
they're being
Chair,
minuted?
so it's probably sufficient.
So we can just move on to agenda 10, which is the day of the next meeting. So if you're all in agreement with that, the date of the next meeting, I think we will try and get it the first week of October, and we will work offline to finalise that date and then get it published as soon as possible. Is everyone in agreement with that? Great. So I think that finishes the meeting. So thank you very